The laughter struck like a slap across the tarmac. Rachel Monroe stood frozen near the edge of the Skitec hangar, her grease-stained coveralls soaked with spilled coffee, her application fluttering in the wind like something discarded like her. "That drone is a 12 million system," the lead instructor sneered, ripping her folder in half. "It's not for glorified mechanics with night school certificates." A few trainees chuckled. One recorded the scene on his phone. "Try flying a vacuum first, sweetheart," someone muttered. Rachel said nothing. Her fingers, trembling but steady, reached into her jacket pocket, brushing against a worn wristwatch her father's. A mechanic. Lie. They thought that, because Rachel Monroe wasn't just here to fly. She was here to prove that skill has no pedigree and courage, no uniform. And the sky was about to find out. Long before anyone knew her name, Rachel Monroe was the quiet shadow in every hangar. The woman in the corner with a wrench in one hand and a schematic in the other, solving problems no one else noticed. She didn't come from a fancy academy or a family name with flight credentials carved in marble. She came from Bakersfield, California, dusty roads, oil rigs, and a father who smelled of engine grease and believed a daughter could fix anything a man could. Her childhood wasn't filled with dance recitals or sleepovers. It was Saturdays under the hood of a truck, Sundays passing tools on the concrete floor of Monroe repairs. While other girls learned makeup tutorials, Rachel memorized torque specs and airflow dynamics. Her father never called her princess. He called her partner. She didn't go to MIT. She went to night school, paid for it herself while working full-time at a regional airfield. She fixed everything from crop dusters to medevac Heelys, earning a reputation as the woman who could make a grounded bird sing again. No degree framed her walls, but flight captains trusted her word more than the computer readouts. When her father passed from a sudden heart attack, Rachel inherited more than just his shop. She inherited his unfinished dream, to see someone in their bloodline fly not as a passenger, but as a pilot. She sold the business to fund her education, downsized to a one-bedroom apartment near Skitec's flight center, and took the biggest risk of her life. Skitec wasn't meant for people like her. It was a gleaming center of innovation, partnered with the military, training the next generation of drone pilots, engineers, and airspace controllers. The brochure didn't say elitist, but it didn't have to. Tuition was 90-0. Most students came from military academies, legacy defense families, or Ivy League tech programs. Rachel, she came with calloused hands and a community college transcript plus hundreds of logged hours on modified UAV systems and a near photographic memory of flight protocol. She got in on merit. Barely. A single scholarship seat had opened last minute after a sponsor dropped. Rachel submitted her application 3 hours before the deadline and got an acceptance email 2 days later. No interview, no welcome packet, just a start date and a stern warning about the academy's high expectations. Her first day, she wore her best attempt at pilot professional. A borrowed blazer, hair tied back, the wristwatch her father wore when he rebuilt his first engine. She walked into that hangar not to impress anyone, but to honor the man who taught her how to think like a machine and fight like a human. What she didn't expect was to be treated like she didn't belong the moment she crossed the yellow safety line. Rachel's boots had barely crossed the training zone when it began. At first, it was subtle. A few sideways glances, a smirk from one of the younger cadets as she passed. Then came the whisper just loud enough to sting. "Who let the mechanic into flight command?" It wasn't the words. It was the tone. Amused, condescending, and certain. During the first simulator briefing, she took a seat in the front row like every student who knew their preparation would have to work twice as hard to be taken half as seriously. A tall guy in a branded Skitec hoodie looked down at her from the row behind. "You lost, lady?" he asked, half laughing. "Tech bay's in Building C." Rachel didn't respond. She opened her manual, took out a pen, and started annotating margins with her own notes. The guy leaned into his friend. "She's actually serious." That week, the instructors paired trainees into study groups. Rachel was placed with 3 former Air Force officers and the son of a defense contractor. She introduced herself politely. "I'm Rachel, background in systems engineering and UAV repairs. I've logged about." Yeah, we'll let you know if we need anything fixed, one of them interrupted. They gave her the busywork scheduling sessions, fetching materials, and talked over her every time she offered technical input. One even said it outright. You're good with tools, but this program's about mental precision, flight instinct. You can't fix your way through a combat simulation. Later, in the academy cafeteria, Rachel stood alone at the coffee machine when she overheard the tail end of a joke at her expense. Bet she thinks propellers still belong on drones. Laughter erupted behind her. She said nothing, poured her coffee, walked away. But the worst came on the fourth day, during the first group simulation run. Each trainee was supposed to fly a coordinated drone strike in a simulated urban environment. Rachel was assigned as Mission Navigatora role that required analyzing data feeds in real time and rerouting squad members based on shifting threats. It was a complex, mentally demanding position. Halfway through the exercise, as a surprise enemy signal jammed their comms, Rachel calmly identified the interference pattern and rerouted the signal through a sideband relay. "Bravo team, shift to channel 6, she said into the mic. "You've got 30 seconds before the firewall closes." Her voice was confident, measured, correct. But the team leader, a smug pilot named Kyle, refused to follow the order. "She's not even rated for combat sim. Stay on mission." They failed, spectacularly. The after-action review was brutal. The instructor didn't reprimand Kyle. Instead, he turned to Rachel. "You gave a command you weren't authorized to give. Stay in your lane next time." No mention of her correct diagnosis. No credit for thinking faster than anyone else in the room. Just a thinly veiled message. "You don't belong here. Not really." That night, someone slid a note under her dorm door. No name, just 5 words in block letters. "Stick to fixing things, Monroe." Rachel held it for a long moment, then tucked it into her flight manual. She wouldn't tear it, wouldn't burn it. She'd keep it like a scar that reminded her exactly what she was up against. They didn't know it yet, but they'd just handed her fuel. And Rachel Monroe had always known what to do with fire. The summons came on a Friday morning, folded in an official envelope with Skitec's embossed seal. Rachel Monroe was to report to the Office of Program Oversight immediately. The hallway to the director's suite felt colder than the rest of the building. White floors, sterile glass, the distant hum of servers running analytics. When she knocked, a voice told her to enter, flat and unreadable. Colonel Dean Harrow stood behind a minimalist steel desk. He didn't look up from the screen. "Sit." Rachel remained standing. He tapped the keyboard once, then fixed his gaze on her. It was clinical, the way someone might inspect a damaged tool. "We've received multiple complaints," he began, "about your conduct, your disregard for hierarchy, and your inability to integrate into team exercises." Rachel didn't flinch. "Is there any formal citation attached to these complaints?" Harrow's nostrils flared. "Don't get smart, Miss Monroe. You're here on a provisional scholarship. You weren't even our first choice. Hell, your resume barely met the baseline. I authorized your admission personally, and now I'm beginning to wonder if that was a mistake." He slid a file across the desk. Her last simulation performance reported, her name marked with red underlines. "Your situational judgment score has been adjusted based on peer feedback." Rachel stared at the document. Her original number accurate, well above average, had been downgraded to marginal. "I wasn't informed of any formal peer review," she said quietly. "You don't need to be. This isn't a democracy," Harrow said. "It's a command structure, and command structures don't function when one part starts thinking it knows better than the whole." He stood up slowly, walked around the desk until he was eye to eye with her. "You're disruptive, Monroe. Not just to your team, to the cohesion of this entire program. Your background, your age, your attitude. You make people uncomfortable. And frankly, you draw attention to gaps in our vetting process." Rachel spoke through clenched teeth. "Because I don't come from the usual mold. Because you don't belong in this mold." The room went silent. Then Harrow delivered the final blow. "We're offering you a transfer. out of the drone combat track, into our systems maintenance program. It's better suited for your skill set. You'll still graduate, with distinction even. But flight command is off the table. Rachel blinked, once. Is that an order? No, he said, a small smile curving at the edge of his mouth. It's a lifeline. She didn't take it. As she turned to leave, Harrow called after her. If you walk out without signing that reassignment, you'll be held to the highest standard we've ever enforced. There won't be room for another misstep. Rachel paused at the door. Good, she said, voice steady. That means I'll be the first. She stepped into the hallway, the door clicking shut behind her like a sealed vault. They thought they were closing it on her. They had no idea she was already building her own runway. The Skitec flight deck was quiet at night. Empty chairs, blinking monitors, coffee mugs abandoned mid-shift. Rachel had started coming here after hours not to rebel, not to be dramatic, but because it was the only place she could think clearly. The simulators ran silent loops in standby mode, and in the stillness, she reviewed telemetry data, rewrote her notes, and practiced emergency protocols long after everyone else had gone home. That night, something changed. She had just finished cross-checking her training logs when she heard voices echoing from the adjacent command briefing room. The door was slightly ajar. A thin beam of fluorescent light spilled into the hallway. She wasn't eavesdropping, she told herself that, but the words froze her in place. They haven't patched the fail-safe. The system still destabilizes above the 28K threshold. One voice said, gruff, authoritative, Colonel Harrow. Another voice responded. It was Dr. Lin, Skitec's lead systems architect. I flagged it to the manufacturer months ago. The AI stabilization algorithm breaks under vertical thrust loads past 0 feet, especially during lateral yaw correction. The neural net overcorrects. We've seen the spinouts in testing. Rachel's eyes widened. She had seen this before. Years ago, during her time in UAV design, she'd proposed a fail-safe adaptive thrust-dampening protocol that would counteract precisely that kind of destabilization. Her solution was ignored. She was a contractor back then, a blue-collar thinker in a room full of PhDs. In the briefing room, Harrow muttered, "The PR fallout, if something happens during next week's live demo, would be catastrophic. We'll tell the trainees to stick to the recommended ceiling and maneuver profile. They'll never reach the trigger conditions. But if someone pushes it," Lin asked, "if they improvise mid-demo, then it's on them. The data says it's rare. We keep quiet. Let marketing do its job." Rachel backed away, heart pounding. This wasn't just a flaw, it was a death trap waiting to be sprung. And none of the trainees had been told. Especially not Troy Keeganthi, top cadet, reckless and showy, the Academy's golden boy. He'd boasted earlier that day about showing off combat maneuvers the engineers are too scared to test. Rachel knew what was coming. The moment someone tried to break the envelope mid-flight, the drone would lock into a fatal spin, and Skitec would call it pilot error. Unless someone stopped it. Unless someone showed them live, undeniable how to fix it. She returned to the simulator, pulled up the archived files she had once written and saved. Monroe, failsafe, adaptive, 2.1. Then she did something that would risk her future entirely. She printed the document, slid it into a folder, and walked straight into Colonel Harrow's office the next morning without an appointment. "You can ground me, fail me, blacklist me," she said, laying the folder on his desk. "But if you let them fly those drones with that flaw, and someone gets killed, you won't just lose your job, you'll wear that blood." And for the first time since she arrived, the room went absolutely silent. The day of the Skitec demonstration arrived with a cloudless sky and a crowd thick with industry brass. Executives from defense contractors, journalists from aerospace publications. Even a Pentagon liaison watched from the VIP deck. 4 students were scheduled to fly high-performance, AI-assisted drones through a precision course over the Mojave test range. Rachel Monroe wasn't one of them. She stood alone near the hangar's edge, dressed in her maintenance jumpsuit, holding a clipboard she no longer pretended to care about. She was officially non-essential support staff for the day, unlisted, unacknowledged, and in theory, silent. Troy Keegan, the Academy's golden boy, was the final pilot on the roster. He swaggered across the tarmac, flight suit perfectly pressed, helmet under one arm, flanked by reporters. "I've got a few surprises planned," he smirked. "Time to show them what real flying looks like." Rachel's stomach clenched. She knew exactly what those surprises meant. Maneuvers beyond the simulator, altitudes beyond safety. She turned toward the control tower, where Colonel Harrow stood watching like a king overseeing his tournament. She climbed the stairs, every step echoing. "Harrow," she said, blunt and breathless, "you can't let him fly the profile he's planning. The stabilization flaw will kick in above 28, 0 feet if he tries high-speed yaw corrections. The AI will overcompensate. It'll spin out." "I already told the cadets to stick to the parameters," Harrow replied, eyes on the sky. "If he deviates, that's his choice, his risk." Rachel stepped closer. "You know it's not that simple. These kids have been trained to outperform, to impress you. He will push it. You and I both know that." "I've read your memo." "Impressive," he said flatly, "but that fix was never vetted. You're not cleared to fly. You're not even cleared to be in this room." Rachel held his gaze. "Then clear me now. Let me fly the backup unit. Let me demonstrate what happens if he breaks protocol and how it can be corrected." "You're not on the flight list." "Then put me on it." Silence. Then a voice crackled over the radio. "Keegan to control climbing past 29. 0. Requesting clearance to engage advanced vector thrust." Rachel's heart stopped. Harrow's jaw clenched. He turned to the flight tech. "Is he serious?" "He's deviating," the tech said. "Speed increasing. Altimeter reading 31,500. Then it began. On the monitors, Keegan's drone jerked mid-climb. The smooth arc of ascent turned into a wobble, then a spiral. Warnings flooded the console. "Control! I've got a problem. Control's unresponsive system override failed." The drone spun like a leaf in a wind tunnel, plummeting in a corkscrew. Gasps erupted in the control room. Rachel didn't wait for permission. She grabbed the headset, slammed into the empty console seat beside the technician, and flipped open the live override panel. "Keegan, this is Rachel Monroe. Manual override now. Cut AI control. Thrust to 32%. Engage dampener loop. Feed command. Delta. 4. Alpha. Static." "Do it now, Troy." Silence stretched for half a second too long then. Override engaged. Command input. Stabilizing. The drone leveled. Just barely. Its path staggered like a drunk recovering from collapse, but it wasn't falling anymore. Keegan's breathing filled the channel. You saved me." Rachel didn't reply. She turned to Harrow. "Let me fly," she said, her voice now a low burn. "Not to show off, to show the truth. Let them see the flaw and the fix." A minute passed before Harrow gave a curt nod. 10 minutes later, Rachel stood on the tarmac in a borrowed flight suit, the backup drone warming beneath her. Her name wasn't in the program, but suddenly, every eye was on her. As the drone lifted off, guided by her steady hands in the cockpit-like control module, Rachel spoke into the comms. "Control, this is Operator Monroe. Request permission to demonstrate adaptive dampening protocol in high-altitude conditions." A pause. Then, "Cleared for ascent. Caution advised." She climbed fast, higher than any pilot had that day. 30, 0 feet. Then 30, 1, 0. Wind resistance buffeted the frame. Her telemetry lit up with warnings. Then, deliberately, she replicated the conditions that had caused the previous spiral. The drone began to wobble. This time, she didn't flinch. Her hands flew across the interface, entering a sequence she had designed years ago in a forgotten server room where no one had listened. The AI recognized her commands. Stabilizers adjusted. The drone glided smooth again then, sharper, faster, tighter than ever before. Rachel performed a series of precision maneuvers that had been considered too unstable to test until now. A loop, a barrel roll, a hard bank dive, followed by a flawless climb. Below, the crowd stared in stunned silence. In the tower, Harrow whispered, almost to himself, "She's rewriting the manual." Rachel completed the course and brought the drone home with such grace, it seemed to land on air. When she emerged from the module, sweat at her brow and eyes blazing, the silence turned to applause. Reluctant at first, then rising, then thunderous. The head systems engineer stepped forward, awestruck. "Who designed that fix?" Rachel looked him dead in the eye. "I did, 3 years ago. You shelved it because the name on the file wasn't from your team." No one spoke. Cameras flashed. In that moment, there was no uniform, no resume, no pedigree that could touch what she'd just done. She hadn't just saved a life. She'd saved the truth from being buried. And for the first time since stepping into Skitec, Rachel Monroe wasn't the woman in the background. She was the woman who had flown through fire and come back leading the way. The applause hadn't even faded when the narrative began to shift. By nightfall, Rachel Monroe's flight had made its way onto social media feeds recorded from multiple angles, stitched into slick edits with dramatic music, and shared under hashtags she'd never imagined being part of. "Fly like her." Monroe Protocol. The fix they ignored. News headlines followed. Unlisted technician prevents drone catastrophe, then outflies the Academy's best. Monroe maneuver could reshape AI flight standards, say engineers. But the loudest reaction came from inside Skitec. Colonel Harrow called an emergency press briefing. With his jaw tight and his eyes unreadable, he delivered a carefully worded admission. "Today's demonstration revealed a critical oversight in our systems. Miss Monroe's actions not only averted a disaster but demonstrated a level of technical understanding and calm under pressure that exemplify the very ideals this institution claims to uphold. We will be conducting a full review." A pause. Then he added, "Effective immediately, Rachel Monroe is reinstated as a full-status trainee retroactively." But Rachel didn't attend the press conference. She was sitting alone in the maintenance bay, wiping grease from her hands, surrounded by the machines that had always made more sense than people. When a junior cadet peeked in wide-eyed, starstruck, she nearly laughed. "Is it true?" the girl asked. "You fixed the AI?" Rachel shrugged. "I just stopped it from making the same mistake twice." That night, messages flooded her inbox. From technicians at Lockheed, from former instructors who never returned her emails, from women who had dropped out of flight programs after being told they didn't have the right mindset. One message simply read, "I wish I hadn't quit. Watching you fly made me feel like I could have stayed." The following week, Skitec's board announced the formation of a scholarship initiative funded by sponsors who had watched the demo firsthand. It was named the Monroe Resilience Grant for students with non-traditional backgrounds who demonstrate exceptional potential. Rachel declined the offer to have it named after her at first. "It should be named after someone who didn't get the chance to prove themselves," she said. But Harrow insisted. "You proved it for them. And for us." Even the pilot she saved, Troy Keegan, approached her with a handshake that looked more like surrender. "You didn't just save me," he admitted, eyes lowered. "You embarrassed every one of us, and I deserved it." Rachel held his gaze. "Maybe. But don't waste the lesson. The system's broken, but you're in it. Help fix it from the inside." She didn't want a parade. She didn't want the headlines. What she wanted was for the next Rachel, someone overlooked, dismissed, written off to walk into a classroom or cockpit and never have to prove they belonged before being allowed to try. Change didn't come with applause. It came when the noise died down, and people quietly did better. The shift wasn't loud. It didn't come with headlines or ribbon cuttings. It started in silence, the kind that follows something undeniable. After Rachel's flight, the swagger in the halls softened. The smirks faded. Instructors who once rolled their eyes at her questions now paused before speaking. Trainees who once mocked her took longer to answer during simulation reviews, unsure of themselves in a way they hadn't been before. One morning, a cadet, one of the loudest from the early days, stopped her outside the simulator bay. "I rewatched the footage," he muttered. "Twice." She waited. "You didn't just outfly us," he said. "You thought the machine." Rachel only nodded. She didn't need the apology to be perfect. She just needed it to be real. Word of her adaptive maneuver spread beyond Skitec. Regional academies reached out for access to her manual override protocol. A few commercial drone programs asked her to speak. She declined most of the invitations. "I'm not done learning," she told them. "Let me finish what I started here first." The biggest change came quietly. A new trainee, a single mother with no military background, walked into orientation and wasn't the only one like her. And no one laughed. Months later, Rachel stood beneath the late afternoon sky, guiding a group of cadets through a flight recovery drill. A girl, no older than 15, watched from behind the fence, her face pressed to the chain links, eyes tracking every turn of the drone overhead. Rachel waved her over. "Want to try?" The girl hesitated. "I'm not smart enough for this stuff." Rachel smiled gently and held out the controller. "That's what they used to say about me, too." As the drone lifted steady, Smooth, the girl's breath caught in wonder. Behind them, the sky stretched wide and open. Rachel didn't need statues or speeches. She needed this. A girl touching a controller for the first time, thinking maybe she could belong up there. Because some ceilings don't shatter with noise. They break when someone shows the way through and leaves the door open behind them.